The On Target Institute presents small group leadership and facilitation training, exploring practical methods to start, facilitate, and lead all types of small group ministry. Now with today's session, On Target founder Vince D'Acchioli.
Hello, men. It's good to be with you again and to welcome you to our 7th OTI Leadership Training session dealing with counterproductive roles in group dynamics. You may recall in our last series of sessions, we dealt with what I call the 4 pillars of leadership. Just as a reminder, they were character, discipline, vision, and love. Very, very important ideas that we unpacked for you. In this and the next 3 or 4 sessions, we're going to be talking about the various types of men that you're going to encounter in your facilitation of small groups. Specifically, the talker, the silent, the one agenda guy, and the teacher theologian. A number of years ago, we did some role playing and recorded it for you to be able to view now as we visit these 4 different roles. So now let's look in and we'll see you on the other side. Let's pick a discussion question. The teacher has just finished teaching on dealing with fear, anger, unforgiveness, letting go of our past, dealing with issues, and we all carry around baggage from our past. And the discussion question goes something like this. Share 1 or 2 issues from your past that are most hindering you, and how? That's a pretty heavy-duty question. I mean, we got to look into some things that we've experienced, and what are some of the things we've experienced that are really getting in our way and really hindering us, okay? Now, the first example that we're going to enter into is a guy who kind of keeps on talking and may be taking up a little bit too much airtime. How many of you had experience with guys that just take up a little bit too much airtime and know that sometimes it can be awkward to inject and get in and kind of corral that guy? But as a facilitator, you know you have to do that. Okay, so I've asked Basil here to kind of play that role, and now as a facilitator, we've just finished, and I say, well, guys, what do you think about this issue of letting go of your past? Anybody got anything that they'd like to share about some issues from their past that are hindering you and how they're hindering you?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I had to deal with in my life was fear. I never realized how much fear impacted my every decision in my life. You know, when I was a kid, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to go to college, and then finally I was able to go, and then when I went, I was afraid I wouldn't make it, and then finally I did get to go, and then after that I was afraid that I wouldn't get a good job, and then I did get a good job. So it was always that fear, and then finally when I got the good job, I was afraid that
Now, that's an example of what you don't want to do if a guy is talking too much. All right, now let's pretend like Basil has been going on and on and on, but now do that one more time. Just start talking. Let me show you a technique that works every time. Go ahead.
And when I got to college, I just felt that I was afraid that I wouldn't get a good job. You know,
that's really interesting, Basil. When you were going to college, the fear was that you wouldn't get a good job. Did that have to do with a fear of failure? I mean, because a lot of men struggle with a fear of failure. Danny, you ever struggle with a fear of failure?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now let's stop there for just a second. What did I just do? There are 2 things that I did. What did I do? No. What's the very first thing I did? I touched him. Okay. Now, most of the time, unless you're dealing with an Italian, most of the time when you touch a person who's talking, they stop. Now, obviously, the person that's talking may not always be in a physical proximity where that is something that you can do. You could kick him under the table, I suppose. But the first thing I do is I stopped him by touching him. And then he wanted to keep going a little bit, but he noticed that I touched him. He looked right at me, and then he eventually stopped. And what happened was that I took an element of what he was saying and began to confine him by putting him into a box and talking about just one aspect of it, and very quickly, but I think courteously, deflected it. Now, he may feel like he had more to share, and probably with a guy like this, he'll come back and he'll share later, and I might have to do that again. But I was able to deflect and say and actually direct a question about that issue to another person, and that is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, as the guy's talking, to wait for an appropriate time when the guy just has a pause and to enter in. Now, we've all had experience with that. You can enter in, but again, don't just enter in to be disruptive and be discourteous. Enter in thoughtfully. Think about something that person said and encourage them and say, boy, that was a good point. And maybe, even if the guy's been talking a lot, maybe he has a lot to say. Maybe you can redirect him towards something that he's already spoken to and say, just take a moment. Basil, could you just take a moment and talk about that? Sometimes when you say it that way, they'll be a little bit more aware of the time constraints. And those are some ways you can do that. But the touching actually does work. It's a very, very good technique. And then again, courteously entering in and interrupting them at appropriate time. Now, there are instances, how many of you have experienced instances where even though you try some of these things, the guy is doing it repeatedly? All the time, seems to be doing it, and it even becomes obvious. You watch the negative reaction to guys in your group. You notice what did Danny do? He went immediately looking for his watch. Now that's a nonverbal way of telling Basil, you're taking too long. So really, Danny's sending two messages. He's not really. You think he's looking at his watch because he cares what time it is? No, and a lot of guys will do that. Now that can send a very discourteous message sometimes. And as a facilitator, I need to be watching for those kinds of things too. Because I may have to talk to Danny at some point and say, Danny, I don't mind you doing that, but we need to be careful about that. But also, do you think I might have to talk to Basil sometime? I might have to say after the meeting, Basil, I need to talk to you just for a few minutes. And again, very courteously, hey Basil, man, I really appreciate what you have to say, man. You've got a lot of good stuff to say, but I need your help. If you ask for their help, bring them in like they're co-facilitating even, and say, could you help me, guys? I really want to help bring some of these guys out. Give them the responsibility of helping you look for other things. Anybody else have another example in just this mode right now where we're talking about people who talk too long? Any other examples that you might have that you could share real quick? Anybody here? Yes, go ahead, Mike.
The example that I would like to know how to deal with is when someone is acting like they're going to pose a question, but they'd never get around to it.
And as a result of acting like they're posing a question and they never get around to it, they take up a lot of airtime. You hear that a lot of times, by the way, when you get people that call into radio talk shows, don't you? Because they just keep going on, and then finally the host, what does he do? He says, excuse me, but for the sake of time, could you get to your question? You need to try to do that courteously, but what you do in a situation like that, well, who has an example of what you might do in a situation like that? You got a guy who's going to ask a question. I've got a question, and they just keep going and going and going. Anybody got any ideas?
We could say, because we have a limited amount of time available, could we go ahead and get to the question and
Yeah.
answer that?
Yeah, you could wait for, wait for a pause and say, we do have a limited amount of time available. If you could distill that question down into one or two sentences, what would it be? Yes.
Or try to clarify what they're saying. What I hear you saying is,
Good.
it's put words in their mouth and then let them correct it.
Exactly. Clarify what they're saying. I think what I'm hearing you say is this, and you can funnel a guy, or again, put him back into a box and have him clarify, and when you ask questions like that, it narrows down what they can talk about or focus on. So usually a guy like that has so much to say that actually some guys like that will actually go into a teaching mode within their question. The question will be just another way of couching something that they want to make in the way of a statement. So you need to be careful with that. But again, in everything we do here, season it with grace and make sure that you're very courteous as you do that. The other thing you might do in this area, and I've mentioned this before, is to give the group permission as a group that when you think any of you are taking too much time for us to, and sometimes you can do that in a comical way, like just calling a timeout or just, raising a red flag, or, hey man, whenever the group goes, we all look at each other and say, we all kind of nod, well, hey guys, thumbs up, and then Basil says, oh, okay, all right, I'm taking too much time. It's kind of a lighthearted, fun way of sending a message. It doesn't hurt his feelings, but again, as a facilitator, try to not get this mindset. Oh my goodness, the guy's taking too much time, and how am I going to break this cycle? Don't do that. Have that in the back of your mind, but listen carefully to what he's saying. A good facilitator listens very carefully to what this man is saying, because deep within what he is saying, there's either a hurt there or there's a real jewel there that needs to be expressed and drawn out, and it's your job to do that, but to narrow it down and take less time. Okay, another question over here from George.
Yeah, it's along the same lines. Guy's going through a divorce. He has some real deep needs. The group obviously is really helping him in that area, but he tries to turn it into a counseling session just for him.
Yes. Okay, now
Five guys or 8 guys counseling him.
there you go. A guy's got a really deep need, something just happened, maybe traumatic in his life, and he's really looking for counseling. Now, we've already said we don't want to get into a counseling mode. We need to love the guy. But let's take that a step further. Let's say that he's got a real heavy issue that's just happened, and instead of it being an issue from his past, he kind of wants to take the group away from that discussion question just for a little bit because, you know, he's just been hurt. Maybe he's going through a separation from his wife, and boy, it's blowing us away. Now, what do? Do you cut a guy like that off? No. See, that gets back into trying to manage that tug-of-war between task and between people. There are going to be those occasions where you need to let the guy go. And everybody's going to recognize that, generally. If the guy's got a serious problem that needs to be dealt with, and they trust you as a facilitator, they're going to give the guy some leeway there. So you need to be in a position to do that as well. Go ahead, George. You have another?
As a follow-up, but if that becomes a pattern, and after the third or fourth or fifth week, the whole group's becoming a counseling session.
When it becomes a pattern, that's the other aspect of that then you need to deal with that. And that's the time, by the way, when you may need to take the man aside and you may need to coach him a little bit. Facilitation is also coaching. And you take him aside, and again, you help him, first of all, at two levels. You help him with his need, because he obviously has needs. And the other is you engage him and have him try to volunteer and help you with the needs of the others in the group.
Okay, a lot of information there. We've just dealt with the talker. Couple of things to remember. Listen, always be courteous. Compliment them on some of the things that you can pull out of what they're talking about, and try to find places where you can enter in and maybe direct them in a way that moves it to another person to give some input. These are important ideas for you to remember. Remember, if it doesn't improve and the person is not willing to bend into your encouragement to kind of slow down, you may have to talk to him separately at some point. Now, the next film clip we're going to be dealing with is the silent. So stay tuned, and you may want to discuss this if you're in a group setting right now with the guys that you're with before we do that. God bless you.